Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Wednesday, December 31st, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. The high in Riverside today is 60.9 degrees, with a low of 57.3, making for a mild close to the year as we celebrate New Year's Eve. Coming up, we'll examine the reasons behind the United States conducting its inaugural drone strike within Venezuela's borders, and unpack California's new requirement for all rental units to include essential kitchen appliances. Plus, other key stories on global tensions, local policy shifts, and more. All this and more coming up on Alex's News. Stay tuned. We're following fast-moving developments after a covert U.S. strike inside Venezuela. Reporter Ethan Morales is with us. Ethan, what did the U.S. hit, and when did this happen?
The strike happened on Christmas Eve, which was 1 week ago today. According to CNN and the New York Times, anonymous U.S. officials say a CIA-operated drone, likely an MQ-9 Reaper, hit a facility along Venezuela's northwest coast in Zulia State. President Trump first hinted at it on Saturday, then on Monday confirmed a, quote, major explosion in the dock area where they load the boats up with drugs, end quote. NPR notes it's the first publicly acknowledged U.S. land strike in Venezuela since operations intensified in late 2024.
And this is part of a larger campaign, right? How does it fit into Operation Southern Spear?
It's a centerpiece of what the administration calls Operation Southern Spear, a multi-pronged effort launched in late 2024. PBS NewsHour reports the U.S. has surged the largest armada in the Caribbean in roughly 5 decades, led by the carrier Gerald R. Ford, with more than a dozen warships and F-35 jets. Unmanned systems, including drones and robotic boats staged from Puerto Rico and Florida, have been interdicting suspected drug vessels since last September. AP reporting carried by PBS counts at least 30 maritime strikes with more than 107 deaths.
Did the military run this one, or was it strictly intelligence?
The White House and CIA did not comment directly, and President Trump avoided naming the agency. But U.S. Special Operations Command told reporters it wasn't involved in the intelligence or execution. PBS's Nick Schifrin framed this as a rare moment where a president publicly acknowledges a covert strike without details. That unusual disclosure, just 2 days before today, signals the White House wanted the world to know it's willing to hit inside Venezuela.
What did the president say the target was?
He described it as a shoreline loading site used by the gang Tren de Aragua and tied to Venezuelan officials known as the Cartel de los Sols. He said, quote, "We hit all the boats and now we hit the area," end quote. He claimed the blast destroyed a place where drug boats are loaded. According to NPR's piece today, that description dovetails with his broader argument that Maduro's inner circle profits from narco-trafficking.
But there are questions about what was actually hit. What's the dispute?
That's right, and it's central. Geolocated videos analyzed by local journalist J. Horman Cruz and OSINT observers point not to a dock, but to an inland chemical warehouse called Primazol, several miles from the water. Orinoco Tribune and Latin Times say residents reported chlorine smells consistent with a plastics or resin fire, not a coastal drug loading point. The war zone noted there's no public satellite imagery confirming a dock strike, and groups like Bellingcat have not issued a definitive assessment as of today.
Has the company said anything?
Primazol posted statements and footage blaming an electrical failure, denying any attack. Insight Crime says it found no previous links between Primazol and Tren de Aragua. That doesn't settle it, but it highlights the evidentiary gap between the president's claim and what independent analysts see so far. CNN and the New York Times, citing U.S. sources, still describe a CIA drone strike, but they don't resolve the exact target location.
So why is Washington doing this now? What's the stated goal?
The administration says it's cutting off drug revenue that keeps the Maduro government afloat and fuels regional crime. PBS quoted Elliot Abrams, a former Trump envoy, arguing that taking out trafficking hubs can remove hundreds of millions from Maduro-linked networks. Abrams predicted that economic pressure could force protests, a military split, or talks that end with the opposition leader Edmundo Gonzalez taking office. NPR also notes the Justice Department raised the bounty on Maduro to $50 million this year, signaling a harder line.
But does the data support the idea that Venezuela is the main drug pipeline?
Not really, according to the UN and U.S. drug agencies. The UN Office on Drugs and Crime and DEA Assessments, cited by the New York Times and Insight Crime, say Venezuela is mainly a transit corridor for roughly 10 to 13% of global cocaine, most of it coming from Colombia. Venezuela is not a major source of fentanyl to the U.S. DEA maps point to Mexico with Chinese precursors. That doesn't absolve Caracas of corruption, but it complicates the claim that a single inland site was a central factory for U.S.-bound drugs.
How is Caracas reacting to the strike and the rhetoric?
Maduro hasn't directly acknowledged the strike, which NPR suggests may be a move to avoid an escalatory spiral. In a speech yesterday, he praised his military as, quote, emancipating humanist invincible warriors, end quote, without naming the blast. Diosdado Cabello called U.S. actions imperial madness and mobilized troops and militias under so-called integral defense provisions, PBS reports. Maduro continues to dismiss the U.S. drug charges as pretexts for regime change.
And outside Venezuela, what's the international response?
It's been sharply critical among Maduro's partners and cautious among neighbors. AP dispatches summarized by PBS say Russia warned Washington against destabilizing the region, and China expressed grave concern about a sovereignty breach. Colombia and Brazil tightened their borders, worried about refugees, while Colombia's President Gustavo Petro vaguely referenced a, quote, cocaine factory, end quote, without evidence. At the UN Security Council, critics invoked the Charter's prohibition on force, and international crisis group analysts described the strike as an act of war under Article 2, Paragraph 4.
What about within the U.S.? Is there pushback on legality?
Yes, though it's mixed. PBS highlighted Senator Marco Rubio supporting pressure on Maduro while warning that Congress will scrutinize the legal basis. The administration says it's fighting a non-international armed conflict against cartel terror networks, a framing used to avoid a formal declaration of war. Intelligence Committee notifications reportedly covered CIA activity, PBS notes, but broader oversight questions persist, especially after the president publicly touted the strike 2 days ago.
Remind us what Operation Southern Spear involves beyond this strike.
Since September of last year, the U.S. has mounted a quasi-blockade targeting oil revenue and suspected smuggling routes. PBS and USNI coverage describe an armada with roughly 15,000 personnel, the carrier Gerald R. Ford, amphibious units, and unmanned systems. NPR reports the capture of at least 2 sanctioned Venezuelan tankers, with a third seeking Russian protection. The Coast Guard chased tankers as recently as the weekend before Christmas, while the White House talks about a, quote, total and complete quarantine, end quote.
Is the administration betting economic pain will crack Maduro's hold?
That's the theory. Abrams told PBS that drying up drug and oil revenue could quickly tilt the balance, spurring street pressure or a split among security forces. But other scholars warned the opposite could happen. Daniel Hellinger told PBS that overshooting could spark guerrilla-style conflict and unleash armed gangs in Caracas, deepening chaos instead of paving the way for a transition.
Has migration figured into the White House pitch here?
Very much so. The administration ties the campaign to stopping what it calls a forced outflow, claiming Maduro emptied prisons and let gangs roam. PBS says the strategy's backers hope a political shift in Caracas would stabilize the country and reduce migration beyond the roughly 8 million people already displaced, possibly climbing into the 9 to 12 million range if conditions worsen. Critics counter that maritime interdictions and strikes don't address the humanitarian collapse driving people to flee.
You mentioned Tren de Aragua. What's their role in all this?
Insight Crime describes Tren de Aragua as a transnational gang more focused on extortion, human trafficking, and migrant predation than large-scale maritime cocaine shipments. The administration is linking them to Maduro's inner circle and to what it calls narco-terror networks. That framing helps justify strikes under a counter-terror rubric. But the precise evidence tying the Christmas Eve blast to that gang's coastal logistics remains thin in open sources.
Is there any proof of killed militants or seized drugs from this strike?
U.S. sources told reporters the site was empty and no casualties were recorded. There's no public evidence of seized cargo from this particular blast. Social media videos show a large fire and smoke, which supports that something significant burned. Absent independent forensics or clear satellite imagery, we're left with competing narratives and circumstantial visuals.
Could the president have mixed up incidents, as some suggest?
Some analysts think so. NBC News and local outlets reported an earlier coastal explosion in Alta Guajira around December 18, which could have been conflated with the Christmas Eve incident inland. The timeline in his public comments, mentioning boats and a dock, doesn't match the geolocations pointing to the Primizal site. As of today, neither Bellingcat nor GeoConfirmed has issued a final verdict.
What's the risk of this spiraling into a wider conflict?
It's substantial, given the forces already in place. PBS and USN, I note this is the region's largest U.S. deployment since the Cuban Missile Crisis, increasing the chances of a miscalculation at sea or along the coast. Caracas has mobilized militias and regular forces, which could respond asymmetrically or through proxy actors. A tit-for-tat cycle could tip from interdictions and covert hits into open clashes.
Are oil markets reacting to the blockade and strikes?
Yes, and it matters for global consumers. El País and Time report that tightening sanctions and the quasi-blockade have disrupted Venezuelan crude flows, contributing to price spikes. Even though Venezuela's output isn't what it once was, lost barrels in a tight market push prices higher. That's part of why regional governments worry about economic shock alongside security risks.
What does this mean for U.S. law and executive power?
Legal scholars are watching closely. Outlets like Truthout have raised concerns about executive overreach, given a covert action that the president then discussed publicly, potentially stretching the take-care clause and war powers expectations. The administration points to intelligence notifications and counter-terror authorities, but that's not the same as a congressional authorization for use of force. Expect more hearings and pushback when Congress reconvenes after the holiday.
How have U.S. allies in the Caribbean handled the operation's footprint?
It's complicated for them. The Guardian reported that the Dominican Republic provided logistical support but faced domestic criticism for abetting intervention. Many smaller islands want drug trafficking curbed, but fear being drawn into a confrontation that invites retaliation or refugee surges. Those politics get even harder when a strike lands on another country's soil, as happened 1 week ago.
Does the administration see this as working so far?
Publicly, yes. Officials and outside allies say the maritime strikes and pressure have cut revenue streams and scared off some shippers and insurers. Elliot Abrams told PBS he sees signs of impending regime collapse. But the counter-argument, voiced by Hellinger and humanitarian groups, is that state and non-state actors in Venezuela could fragment, and that's not necessarily a path to stability or democratic transition.
What are the biggest unknowns as we head into the new year?
3 stand out. First, whether independent imagery or forensic reporting will clarify what actually exploded on December 24. Second, whether Caracas responds directly, perhaps with cyber operations, maritime harassment, or arrests of opposition figures to consolidate control. And third, whether Washington escalates with more land strikes, given the president's hints of further, quote, confrontation, end quote.
How might this reshape regional diplomacy in early 2026?
It could force fence-sitters to choose sides. Brazil and Colombia prefer dialogue and stability, but they can't ignore border pressures and domestic politics if violence spreads. Mexico, already central to U.S. fentanyl policy, will resist precedent for cross-border strikes and argue for addressing demand and supply jointly. The UN Security Council debate we've seen in the past 48 hours is likely just the opening round.
Bottom line, Ethan, what should viewers take away tonight?
The U.S. just crossed a new line, acknowledged by the president himself 2 days ago. The administration sees it as a precise strike in a broader campaign to choke off funds and force change in Caracas. But independent reporting raises real doubts about the target and the legal footing, and the data complicates the narrative that Venezuela is a primary pipeline for U.S. drugs. The risk is that a covert war becomes less covert, more escalatory, and far harder to control.
Ethan Morales, thank you. We'll keep following the story into the new year. California is about to change what counts as a livable apartment. Reporter Chloe is here to explain AB 628. Chloe, what exactly happens tomorrow?
Starting tomorrow, January 1st, landlords in California have to provide and maintain working stoves and refrigerators in apartments. Governor Gavin Newsom signed AB 628 in October of this year, and it reclassifies those appliances as basic habitability, not optional perks. Cal Matters explains this flips a decades-old Southern California practice where tenants brought their own fridges.
Why was California such an outlier on refrigerators and stoves?
The Los Angeles Times found California had one of the lowest rates of refrigerator-equipped apartments in the country, especially in Los Angeles and Orange counties. They cited data from the National Multifamily Housing Council and listings showing many buildings excluded refrigerators, and the census backs up how unusual that is nationally. According to Cal Matters, it became a local custom that tenants would haul appliances between units, even as rents climbed.
How does the law actually change the civil code?
AB 628 amends Civil Code Section 1941.1 to add stoves and refrigerators to the list of required habitability items. Previously, the law mandated things like plumbing, heat, and electricity, but left kitchen appliances as optional amenities. Now, for leases signed, renewed, or amended on or after tomorrow, landlords must install and keep those appliances working.
What is the human story lawmakers say they are addressing?
Assemblymember Tina McKinner said, quote, "A working stove and a refrigerator are not luxuries. They are a necessary part of modern life," end quote, as Cal Matters reported. Tenant advocates told the Orange County Register families were facing an extra $500 to $2,000 up front just to chill food, on top of deposit and first month's rent. LAist has highlighted viral posts of newcomers stunned by empty kitchen alcoves in pricey Los Angeles apartments.
Are there any carve-outs or exceptions?
Yes, the bill exempts single-room occupancy units, hotels, permanent supportive housing, and places with communal kitchens, like some assisted living facilities. Tenants can opt to bring their own refrigerator through a written agreement at lease signing, but landlords cannot force that choice. If a tenant later asks for a landlord-provided fridge, the owner has 30 days to install one, and ongoing maintenance is on the landlord.
What are landlords saying about the costs?
Landlord groups argued this piles new expenses onto owners, especially small operators. Cal Matters quotes a California Association of Realtors lobbyist warning of heavier court burdens and fewer rentals, and groups estimated $1,500 to $2,500 per unit for decent appliances plus repairs. LAist and the Long Beach Post reported that so-called mom-and-pop landlords fear they will be squeezed in a market already facing low vacancy and high insurance.
Did the legislature address energy efficiency or waste concerns?
An early draft tried to set age caps for appliances to encourage efficiency, but that was dropped. Opponents worried it would push working fridges into landfills prematurely, as LAist noted. The final bill focuses on functionality and timely repairs, not mandatory replacement schedules.
How will enforcement work if a landlord refuses?
The same habitability tools apply, but with stoves and refrigerators now clearly covered. Tenants can give written notice, and, if nothing happens within 30 days, withhold a portion of rent or use repair and deduct up to 1 month's rent twice a year, as CAA Net and legal guides explain. The Los Angeles Times has also noted tenants can use lack of required appliances as a defense in eviction cases.
Are there specific penalties spelled out?
Yes, under Civil Code 1942.4, owners can face statutory damages from $100 to $5,000 per violation, plus actual damages like spoiled food and attorney's fees if the tenant prevails. Cities can add daily fines on top of that. Legiscan summaries and housing policy sites say those penalties are designed to push quick compliance rather than drag out disputes.
Where should renters go to file complaints?
In Los Angeles, the housing department handles multifamily issues by phone or online, and building and safety takes single-family complaints. Orange County has code enforcement lines in cities like Anaheim, Santa Ana, and Irvine, and unincorporated areas go through County Public Works, as Fair Housing OC and County Health pages outline. Those channels trigger inspections and orders without making tenants file lawsuits immediately.
Do we know if this will flood the courts, like opponents say?
Experience elsewhere suggests it will not. In New York City and Chicago, where appliances are standard, city data shows appliance complaints are a small slice of overall housing issues, usually resolved administratively, according to Housing Preservation and Development reports and Chicago's Building Department. San Francisco's Rent Board logs a modest share of petitions tied to services like appliances, and tenant groups say most settle before a hearing.
What about the broader rental supply argument?
Economists point out that supply constraints stem more from zoning, financing, and construction costs than the price of a fridge. An NBER study by Diamond and colleagues linked shortages to land use rules and costs, not basic fixtures, and the average refrigerator can be depreciated as normal operations. The Los Angeles area's long tradition of fridgeless rentals did not prevent today's tight vacancy rates, as the San Francisco Chronicle has contextualized.
Is there any chance landlords can pass costs to tenants in rent-controlled cities?
In some places, yes, but in structured, limited ways. Los Angeles allows capital improvement surcharges or mandated work amortization for a period, with caps and timelines, as city bulletins explain. Santa Monica, West Hollywood, San Francisco, Berkeley, and Oakland each have petition processes that spread costs over years while protecting tenants from sudden rent spikes, according to their rent boards.
How soon will tenants actually see new appliances?
It starts as leases turn over, renew, or get amended on or after tomorrow. For existing tenants with older leases, the trigger is the next renewal or any change, so the rollout will be steady rather than instant. CalMatters notes that if an owner voluntarily upgrades a unit or changes terms, that can also start the clock.
What happens if a landlord provides a fridge but refuses to fix it?
Once it is a required service, maintenance is the owner's responsibility. Tenants can document the problem, give written notice, and after 30 days pursue rent abatement, repair and deduct, or complaints to the city. If the issue is a manufacturer recall, the owner still has 30 days to address it after notice.
How did this tradition of bring your own fridge take hold here?
There is no single origin story, but the Los Angeles Times and LAist trace it to older building norms and local custom that never got corrected in law. Smaller landlords avoided the upfront costs and repairs, and tenants kept the habit out of necessity. That created a patchwork where large complexes might include appliances, while many smaller buildings did not.
Are low-income renters the main beneficiaries?
They are among the biggest winners because they face the steepest upfront burdens. The Orange County Register quoted advocates calling the cost a hidden move-in tax that pushed families into debt or food insecurity. By making cold storage and a cooking surface mandatory, the law supports nutrition and reduces recurring move-in costs, which LAist has linked to better housing stability.
Could this lead to rent hikes outside of rent-controlled areas?
Some landlords may try to build costs into asking rents, but competition and disclosure norms matter. The San Francisco Chronicle and Ground News aggregations note that most peer markets already include these appliances without a price premium beyond market forces. With supply tight, rent levels are driven more by vacancy and wages than whether a unit has a fridge, which is increasingly standard.
What should tenants put in writing if they want to opt out and bring their own fridge?
The statute calls for a written agreement at lease, signing with specific language acknowledging the tenant choice. CalMatters says landlords cannot pressure tenants into that option, and the choice does not extend to stoves, which must be provided by the owner. Tenants can later change their mind, and the landlord then has 30 days to supply a refrigerator.
If enforcement is local, how will smaller cities keep up?
Many already run housing code programs that check heat, plumbing, and smoke detectors, so this becomes another checkbox. According to city websites and county portals, inspectors can add appliance verification during routine visits or complaint-driven inspections. That reduces courtroom traffic, as NPR and other outlets have reported in similar habitability contexts.
What is the political backdrop for this bill?
It is part of a broader push in Sacramento to strengthen tenant protections while tackling affordability. The Merced Focus, part of a Central Valley journalism collaborative, framed AB 628 alongside other year-end measures like protections for outreach workers, noting a coordinated tenant-friendly package. CalMatters described how Los Angeles area norms made the appliance gap more visible statewide.
Are there any early legal challenges brewing?
So far, this looks like a straightforward habitability update rather than a constitutional flashpoint. The bill went through normal committee vetting, and its obligations mirror norms in cities like San Francisco and New York, which courts have upheld for years. The Washington Post has noted that clear standards often reduce lawsuits by eliminating gray areas.
What should landlords do today to be ready tomorrow?
Inventory your units, place orders for compliant stoves and fridges, and update lease templates to reflect the new law. CAA Net and city housing departments have checklists, and insurers often recommend documenting installations and warranty coverage to limit risk. Being proactive avoids penalties and keeps turnover smooth as leases renew in the new year.
And for tenants moving this month, what is the bottom line?
If you are signing, renewing, or amending a lease on or after tomorrow, you should expect a working stove and refrigerator provided and maintained by your landlord unless you explicitly opt to bring your own fridge. Save copies of your lease, any appliance agreements, and any repair requests you send. If something goes wrong, local housing agencies and the Civil Code give you clear steps to fix it.
Big shift, simple expectation, a kitchen you can actually use. Chloe, thanks for breaking it down.
Happy to help, Grace. We will keep following how cities implement it and how it affects renters through the winter.
Here are some other headlines. In Iran, the rial is on the ropes and the streets are finding their voice. Spontaneous demonstrations that started December 28th in Tehran have entered a fourth day and spread to major cities as the currency slid to a record 1.45 million to the dollar. What began with bazaar shopkeepers and mobile phone vendors striking over inflation north of 50% has broadened to students at 10 universities and multiple labor groups. President Masoud Pezeshkian's cabinet tapped former Economy Minister Abdul Nasser Hamadi as the new central bank governor and declared a nationwide bank holiday Wednesday, officially blaming the cold but clearly trying to freeze the financial fever. Prosecutor General Mohammad Movahedi-Azad called livelihood protests legitimate while warning of a decisive response to anti-government unrest. The rare alignment of merchants, students, and workers signals a deep crack in the economic foundation after UN snapback sanctions returned in September 2025. Flu is flying off the charts. U.S. health officials report at least 7.5 million illnesses, 81,000 hospitalizations, and 300 deaths this season, fueled by a drifted influenza AH3N2 subclade K, now making up roughly 90% of subtyped samples. New York logged a weekly record 123 positives through December 20th, and 20 states are at very high respiratory activity. With only 42% of adults vaccinated and a fall government shutdown blamed for slowing early shots and surveillance, hospitals in the Northeast and Midwest are feeling the squeeze during peak holiday hustle. Experts warn the current vaccine may offer just 30 to 40% protection against hospitalization for this variant, prompting a pivot to prompt antivirals and masking in clinical settings. In short, it's time to cover your bases and your faces. In Minnesota, the childcare cash flow is in timeout. The Trump administration is freezing all federal child care payments to the state, citing blatant fraud tied to past scandals including a $250 million pandemic food scheme and fresh allegations involving Somali-run daycare centers. HHS wants a comprehensive audit from Governor Tim Walz. He calls the move politicized and harmful to essential services. Nationally, HHS will now require justification and receipt or photo evidence before states get funds from the Administration for Children and Families. The freeze jeopardizes about $185 million a year, supporting care for roughly 19,000 low-income children, escalating federal-state tensions, and sharpening debates over immigration and oversight. For families, the safety net could feel more like a taut rope. In Georgia, a RICO racketing is out of tune. A Fulton County judge tossed racketeering charges against 61 Stop Cop City protesters, ruling Attorney General Chris Carr lacked authority to bring the case without written approval to bypass local prosecutors. 5 defendants still face separate domestic terrorism counts under the AG's statutory powers, and the state plans to appeal while labeling the movement a criminal enterprise, targeting the $109 million training center. For activists, it's a legal lifeline. For the state, a clipped conspiracy cord. And in New York City, it's a subway to City Hall and a signal change at the top. Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani will take a private midnight oath in the old City Hall station with Attorney General Letitia James, followed by a 1 p.m. public swearing-in on the steps administered by Senator Bernie Sanders and a Broadway block party. At 34, he's the youngest in a century and the first Muslim and South Asian mayor, defeating Andrew Cuomo. He's pitching a platform of radical affordability, rent freeze, free buses, expanded childcare, while naming budget veteran Dean Fullahan first deputy mayor and bracing for potential federal funding headwinds. New year, new mayor, big fair play. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with GPT-5, Gemini Pro 3, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.